So it's 2025 right now, so Happy New Year, everyone! But we are still continuing the series where I go over all of the hiking, search, and rescue stories that happened in New Hampshire in 2024. This is part 3. If you haven't seen part 1 and 2, they are on my channel. I'll also link them in the description of this video. We left off on the 4th of July, so these search and rescue stories I'm going to share are all from July and August, so the summer months. So on July 10th, a hiker from the UK was on the Karge North Trail. She was about 1.5 miles away from the trailhead where she fell and hurt her ankle. She was hiking in a group, so they were able to administer some first aid, but she still wasn't able to hike out on her own, so rescuers got to her, put her in a litter, and carried her out. On July 11th, a hiker up on Mount Lafayette was suffering from a heat-related medical emergency. There were staff from the nearby Greenleaf hut that hiked up to him to give him food, water, and electrolytes, but his condition was still deteriorating and it seemed like he was going to need to be carried out. A rescue team started making their way up to the ridge to assist with the rescue when the hiker actually started to get some of his strength back. Maybe it was the food, the water, the electrolytes. They did the trick and he was able to hike down from the ridge back to the Greenleaf hut, and he ended up staying the night there, and then he was able to hike out on his own the next morning. On July 11th, again, this is actually the same day as the last story, there was a hiker descending the Handcocks. She was about 2 miles away from the trailhead when she was also suffering from a heat-related illness. She tried to contact emergency services. The communication was a little bit weak. So rescuers made their way to the trailhead, hiked in, found her, gave her some food, water, electrolytes, and assisted her back to the trailhead. On July 13th, there was a hiker descending the Tuckerman Trail when she fell on a really steep section of terrain and injured her leg. She was about 0.3 miles away from the Carter Notch hut. She was by herself, but some good Samaritans on trail assisted her in getting to the hut. The 0.3 miles ended up taking them 4 hours, but they eventually made it. The crews working at the hut offered her a bunk to stay the night, so she did that. By the next morning, she was still unable to walk on her own, so they sent some rescue crews to get her and they carried her out back to the trailhead in a litter. On July 22nd, there was an event called the Jigger Johnson Ultra Race. This is a race in the White Mountains that is 108 miles. There was a man participating in this event who initiated a Garmin SOS call 13 and a half hours into the event. This was around 6:30 p.m. He was suffering from cramps and he couldn't move for 3 whole hours. So there were communication delays when he set off the Garmin SOS call. So New Hampshire Fish and Game didn't get this alert till about an hour after. But when they did get the alert and the coordinates, they sent rescuers to his location. They weren't able to find him, but it turns out that this man was helped by some other race participants get into a vehicle and get driven back. On July 24th, there were 2 hikers descending the Capps Ridge Trail off of Mount Jefferson. This is actually a really tough trail. It's very steep, bouldery. It kind of reminds me of the hike up Mount Katahdin, and I have a whole video of me doing this trail on this channel with my dog if you want to see what it looks like. But when these 2 hikers were descending, they called 911 because they were lost, tired, and out of water. But when they were on the phone with the conservation officer, they seemed like these people should attempt to self-rescue because it was daylight and because it was warm. So for the next 3 hours, these hikers tried to self-rescue, tried to descend the mountain, but it didn't go well. They called 911 again and said that they still needed help. I guess one of the hikers was starting to get ill, so 2 conservation officers started hiking up the trail to get to these people. They gave them food, water, and headlamps because it was getting dark at this time and assisted them back down the trail. On July 27th, after summiting Mount Washington, a hiker started feeling some heat-related symptoms on the Tuckerman Ravine Trail. He was hiking with 4 friends who were able to help him make it to the Hermit Lake shelter where they ended up staying the night in hopes that he would be recovered and feeling well enough the next morning to hike out on his own. The next morning, the group set off to hike down off the mountain, but after a short distance, the hiker was still feeling very ill. So with the help of his friends and the crew from the hut, they carried him back up to the hut in a litter. They contacted New Hampshire Fish and Game officers, where they drove up the Shelbourne-Moriah Trail in an ATV and put him on the ATV and drove him back down. This trail is drivable. It's also like a ski trail. I've skied down it before, so it was very helpful that they were able to drive up and drive him back down. For these stories, I always read the comments on Facebook to see what people are saying. And for this story, I actually saw a comment from one of this hiker's friends that was in the hiking group. And he chimed in and said that his friend was doing much better. He was back on his feet the next day, but he should have given his friend a little more tough love to eat and drink better to prepare for this hike. And a lot of people in the comments were also talking about the importance of electrolytes and sodium balance. So this is where I want to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Element. As we get into these summer rescues, we're unfortunately going to see dehydration become a trend here. Element electrolyte drink mixes are a great way to stay hydrated on the trail and avoid a lot of these dehydrated related symptoms. The main electrolyte that you lose when you sweat is sodium, and Element has a science-backed formula of sodium as well as potassium and magnesium to help you stay hydrated. It's used by so many different types of people, from Olympians to Navy SEALs, NBA players, hikers, moms, dads. It's really perfect for any type of person doing any activity. Element is offering a free sample pack of 8 different flavors of Element with any purchase when you use my link, which is drinkelement.com/Nahamsha. I always make sure that I add Element to my water when I go on hikes so I can be hydrated and not get a headache, because I will get a headache if I'm dehydrated. I also throw in a couple extra packets in my backpack because I've actually handed some out to other hikers that I've met on trail, and they're all super happy and thankful when I share my Element with them. Again, if you want to check it out, my link is drinkelement.com/Nahamsha. On July 27th, a husband and wife were hiking Mount Chocorua. They were 0.2 miles away from the summit when the wife fell and injured her wrist. The husband called 911 for assistance. A couple other hikers in the area stopped to help. They splinted up the wrist. The 2 hikers, a conservation officer, and a member from the U.S. Forest Service all assisted this woman to hike down off the mountain. On July 28th, a hiker on the Greeley Pond Trail was carrying his son over some wooden planks over the mud on the trail when he fell and suffered serious but non-life-threatening injuries. Thankfully, the son was okay in this situation. Other hikers got in contact with 911 to assist. They got to this hiker within an hour, which is super quick. They stabilized him, and then they assisted him back off the trail. On July 28th, again, the same day, a hiker was a quarter of a mile in on the Sabaday Brook Trail where she fell and injured herself. Rescuers got to her, carried her out back to the trailhead where an ambulance was waiting. On July 30th, a hiker and her friends had planned to do a 2-day Pemi Loop hike. When they realized they weren't going to complete the trail as planned, they decided to bail on the Franconia Brook Trail. Around 3 p.m., the hiker fell forward on a steep, wet section of trail and suffered a serious injury. They were able to initiate an SOS call from the Garmin. One of the friends that this hiker was with was actually a paramedic, so they were able to provide some first aid pretty quickly. Some caretakers from a nearby hut hiked to the hiker to kind of assess the situation to see if a carryout was necessary, which they did confirm. This hiker was 5.4 miles to the nearest trailhead, so rescuers started hiking to her at 5 p.m. and got to her around 8 p.m. At this point, it was determined that this hiker probably could hike out on her own with some assistance, so they did that until about 2 miles away from the trailhead. They were able to get an ATV to her to assist with the rest of the way. In total, there were about 30 volunteers and 5 officers that helped with this rescue, so shout out to everyone involved. There was another rescue that also happened on July 30th. This was a solo hiker on Mount Dicky. She slipped and fell on wet rock. She tried to hike out on her own but couldn't. A couple hikers stopped to assist her, but the injuries were still too severe, so they decided to call 911 for assistance. The fire department made their way to her first to assess the situation, and then more rescuers hiked out to her with a litter so that they could carry her down. The carryout was about 2 miles, and they made it back to the trailhead at 10 p.m. On August 1st, a hiker in between North and SouMot Mountain slipped and fell on wet rock and injured her ankle. She could not bear any weight on her foot, but she continued to crawl in the direction of rescuers while she waited for them. She was about 3 miles from the closest access point, and to help this hiker back to the trailhead, rescuers had to use a harness system just because of the terrain, but they were able to get her out. On August 2nd, a hiker on the Falling Waters Trail slipped on some wet rock and fell between 8 and 10 feet and suffered some serious injuries. Some other hikers on trail assisted and provided some first aid, and rescuers were able to get to this hiker about an hour and 40 minutes after the incident happened. This hiker was placed in a rescue litter and was carried out the 1 mile back to the trailhead. And it is noted in this article that this 150-mile stretch of trail accounts for a lot of rescues, just because the trail is parallel with the river and it's very wet and slippery and steep. So it is noted that hikers on this trail should take their time, be very careful, and wear proper footwear. On August 3rd, a hiker on the Eisenhower Loop Trail slipped on some rocks and suffered a lower leg injury. Because he was not able to bear any weight on the foot, 911 was called. Some hikers did try to provide first aid, but a rescue litter was definitely necessary. This rescue took 20 volunteers, and they carried him the remaining 3 miles back to the trailhead. Unfortunately, on August 6th, a hiker passed away in the White Mountains. This hiker was in between North and South Kinsman Mountain when he suffered a medical emergency. Because rescuers were not going to be able to reach him on foot fast enough to help, an Army National Guard Black Hawk helicopter was sent to assist. So medics from the helicopter reached him and continued life-saving measures that his family had started. They got him into the helicopter, into an ambulance, where he eventually succumbed to this medical emergency. On August 7th, a hiker and her mother were descending Mount Tumsa when the daughter slipped on some rocks and fell on her side, injuring her shoulder. Because she was in such severe pain, the mother called 911. And they were instructed to make a homemade splint and continue hiking down the trail very slowly. Another hiker on the trail helped them out by taking their dog for them and bringing the dog down the trail so that they could focus on getting down safely themselves. Rescuers got to the trailhead, hiked up to meet them, and continued assisting her back down. On August 11th, a hiker slipped and fell and suffered a lower leg injury on the Wildcat Ridge Trail. They're about 0.4 miles from the Cutter Notch Hut, so with some assistance from their friends and some crew at the hut, they were able to make it there and stay the night. The next morning, this hiker was still unable to bear any weight on their ankle, so a rescue team of 30 volunteers arrived at the hut to help with the carryout. On August 13th, a miner on Mount Madog had fallen about 8 feet and landed on their head. Injuries were pretty serious, so a rescue team was very quickly put together to assist with this. They got this hiker off the mountain and into an ambulance right away. On August 19th, a hiker descending Mount Kearsarge slipped on a wet ledge and got pretty injured. Rescuers arrived and actually ended up carrying him back up to the summit of Mount Kearsarge so that rescuers could drive up the access road, get this hiker and then drive him back down. On August 19th, a hiker on the SouMot Trail slipped and fell and injured her ankle. She couldn't bear any weight on it, so rescuers responded within an hour and a half to assist with the carry back to the trailhead. I'm going to end this video here. I don't want these videos to ever get too long or too repetitive, but I am going to continue this series of sharing New Hampshire hiking search and rescue stories from all of 2024. Thank you for all of your positive feedback. You guys are enjoying hearing these series and about all the rescues and how they work, and hopefully you guys can learn a thing or two and be safe out in the mountains. So until the next video, be safe out there, and I'll see you soon. Bye.